of all, thank you very much for attending today. I'm looking forward to sharing a number of experiences as well as some insights that I've gained over the years in the area of applying quality risk management in the context of clinical trials and pharmacovigilance. And that will be integrated into the overall presentation today in various aspects. So let me go ahead and proceed. Let's start off with a few pictures just to bring us into the full swing of things. So here's some real billboards or signs that are out and about that you may have been confronted with in some form or another. If you take a look at this one, it gives a good example of one aspect of risk, which is essentially, on the one hand, it's very much a question of perspective. So whenever we analyze a certain situation, it's very important to understand, well, whose situation or whose perspective is being addressed here in order to determine what the true risk factors that are involved, and then consequently have that be integrated into the risk assessment. So it's not always the risk associated for us or for humans, but it could be for some other entities involved as well. That being the case, let's consider another example. Looking at this one here, now we're looking more at a situation where Dr. Lever is involved with this. This picture is I think, a good indication of how risk is also very much driven by context. So in what contextual situation do you find something to occur, and that needs to be also integrated into the overall identification of that risk, and then also pertain to the impact and similar sorts of things. So we'll bear that in mind as well. So there's contextual aspects involved with that need to be considered. And finally, one last sign to consider that's out there that you may have been confronted with as well. Essentially, my interpretation of this situation is essentially to point out that risks are certainly out there. We need to understand them. We need to, after having understood them, decide what, if anything, we can do about it. And in some cases, as in this case, we simply need to accept those risks because we choose to head down this path anyway, but consequently, having accepted that, bear that in mind with our future actions as well. Good. So a few practical examples that are out there that are not necessarily clinical oriented, but nonetheless, we're here to also learn about risk in general. The learning objectives for this course are outlined here. Like I said, certainly in some level, it's about how we want to apply these principles. And so we'll be focusing in particular on the application in the area of the conduct of clinical trials, so the risks associated with that when executing those protocols that prescribe action, as well as in the context of pharmacovigilance, so looking at the dimension or the perspective of drug safety as well, and how the approach of quality risk management applies in both of these situations. So there's application there. We'll be looking at also how one actually builds this approach into the different underlying processes involved, so concretely how that's applied, integrating an underlying business processes. And we're going to also look into the actual risk model, so how do we really identify risk, and based on that, how are we going to quantify that? So it's not only about a qualitative approach to risk management, it's very much about a quantitative approach as well. And so we're going to explore some of the quantitative aspects by looking at the various possibilities of defining and also calculating risk. And moreover, we'll move on and essentially then take that perspective of how we apply risk management, in particular to quality management in the clinical domain, and how that interacts and has a dependency on compliance, and also highlighting essentially the dependency on data and how that can be leveraged in order to support an overall risk assessment in the context of clinical trials. And then finally, we're going to look at essentially what are the conditions from an organizational standpoint, from a governance standpoint, in order to execute quality risk management, and consider some of those and how they impact the overall implementation approach. Okay, so having said that, let's dive in and get started with the context, get an overview of some of the theory behind that. So Another way of describing this, and sometimes it's important to